session. Let's go to roll call.
Ms. Romero? Here. Mr. Cunningham? Here. Mr. Durham?
Here.
Mrs. Scott?
She's absent.
Mr. Fimbres?
Here.
Mr. Kozaczyk?
Here.
Mayor Rothschild?
Here. Item 2.
Invocation and Pledge of Allegiance.
The invocation will be given by Pastor Larry Munguia. After the invocation, I ask that you remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Mr. Mayor, sir, ladies and gentlemen of the City Council and the backbone of Tucson, the staff, thank you for being here. This is a good time, the beginning of a great new year. It's also a sad time because of the day of the remembrance of the tragedy in Tucson. But let's take the positive. Let's take the good stuff. Let's remember the lessons that we've learned. And most of all, let's take an opportunity like right now to make something happen. If you're so inclined, will you please bow your heads? Lord, I'm just going to talk to you, man, like I know you. So, God, I just ask you to just pour your love onto the city of Tucson. The men and women that you brought into this community, you've put them in those chairs. So, Lord, I ask you to guide them, protect them, to love on them, for them and their families, so the distractions would be minimal and their focus be on the city of Tucson. Lord, we know that you're a mighty, mighty, mighty God. So we come to you completely humbled and ask you this in your name. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I'm going to proclaim January 21st to be the Martin Luther King Day of Service. Councilmember Fimbres, if you would join me at the... I didn't see Donna Liggins or Clarence Boykins here, but is there anybody else here that's going to pick up the proclamation this night? If not, we will go ahead and read it, and I will hand the proclamation to Councilmember Fimbres, who will have a few words to say as well. So as we all know, January 21st, Martin Luther King Day, and it's a day that we all celebrate and take a holiday for, but it's also really supposed to be, in the spirit of Dr. King, a day of service, a day when we all go out and do something in the community to make this a better community, whatever it may be that you see should be done. So, whereas Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. devoted his life to advancing equality, social justice, and opportunity for all, and challenged all Americans to participate in the never-ending work of building a more perfect union. And Dr. King's teachings can continue to guide and inspire us in addressing challenges in our communities. And since 1994, millions of Americans have been inspired by the life and work of Dr. King to serve their neighbors and communities on the King holiday. And whereas serving on the King holiday is an appropriate way to honor Dr. King, meet local and national needs, bring our citizens together, and strengthen our community and nation. And whereas the local King Day of Service projects are being organized by a committee of nonprofits, community organizations, and other entities, including American Red Cross Southern Arizona Chapter, Arizona Serve, Corporation for National and Community Service, Girl Scouts of Southern Arizona, Prescott College, Service for Peace, and Tucson Service Learning Group, among others. And whereas residents of Tucson have an opportunity to participate in events throughout our city on the King Day of Service, January 21, 2019, as well as to support ongoing volunteer needs by committing to a meaningful service throughout the year. Now, therefore, I, Jonathan Rothschild, Mayor of the City of Tucson, do hereby proclaim January 21, 2019 to be Martin Luther King Day of Service in this community and call upon the people of Tucson to pay tribute to the life and work of Dr. King through participation in community service projects on Martin Luther King Day and throughout the year. And with this, I put my hand and seal this 8th day of January 2019. Jonathan Rothschild.
Thank you. And Jonathan, and everybody knows, has participated in the march, what it means to be there and rally and come together, to work together continually to reemphasize the good workings that Dr. Martin Luther King had also spoke about and moved on. And I know that Clarence was here, or Donna, that asked you to come and join them for the Martin Luther King Day March, which will take place at MLK Way at the bridges, and we want to thank the University of Arizona for naming that MLK Way. At the University of Arizona Tech Park, South Parkway on 36th Street in Ward 5. The march will go over to the Demeester Outdoor Performance Center at Reed Park, which they'll hold a celebration and has several booths and people coming together just to thank you and remember the good works that Martin Luther King, and challenge all of us to be in that spirit and work continuously throughout the year to improve the quality of life for all our citizens in our great city, our great county, and our great state. So I invite you all to come out and do that. Thank you.
Okay, let's go to item 2D.
Appointments to boards, committees, and commissions.
City Manager's communication number 4, dated January 8, is received into and made part of the record. May I have a motion to approve the appointments in the report?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember
I'd like
Romero.
to move that we approve the appointments of Mallory Ress, Glenn Fournier, Maurice Roberts, Grace Shua to the Armory Park Historic Zone Advisory Board, and to reappoint Luke Johnson to the Veterans Affairs Committee, and to also reappoint John Birkenbein and Marcellus Rust to the West University Historic Zone Advisory Board.
Got a motion and a second. Are Mr. S., Mr. Fournier, Mr. Roberts, Ms. Shao, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Birkenbein, or Mr. Rusk, are any of you present here tonight? Okay, well, we want to thank you for your anticipated service. All these folks serve without compensation and do a lot of the groundwork that we need to understand the issue, so we thank them for that. Is there any other discussion on this matter?
Your Honor, not included in the report is Norma Kaufman. I'm appointing her to the Parks Commission. Memo will be forthcoming from my office.
Okay. Why don't we include that there? Normally I would ask for additional appointments, but we'll include Norma Kaufman. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? That motion carries. Let's go to item 3.
Mayor and council and city managers reports, summary of current events.
City Manager's communication number 1, dated January 8th, is received into and made part of the record. This time has been scheduled to allow members of the mayor and council and the city manager to report on current events. Does any council member have anything to report at this time? Councilmember Romero.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to thank you actually for inviting my office and my staff and the community to attend the Gabrielle Giffords Memorial Bell ringing this morning at Fire Central for those who were affected by the tragedy of January 8th, 8 years ago today. It was great to be surrounded by the community and pay respects to the injured and their families and the families of those we lost that tragic day. Hope today's event will help cultivate healing and respect for those affected, and that we continue being unified to make our great city and our country a better place. Talking about that, I'd like to invite the community to attend Beyond Tucson events being held this weekend around town. Beyond Tucson is a local organization that empowers community members to explore, move, nourish, and connect. Beyond was started by the family of Gabe Zimmerman following his death in the January 8th tragedy of 2011. Beyond encourages people to get active and move past trauma for a brighter future. Make sure to log on to beyond-tucson.org and attend an event this weekend. In fact, my community cafecito that I'll tell you and invite the community on right now is partnering with Beyond Tucson in hosting bike repairs, courtesy of Living Streets Alliance. We're going to have a bike rodeo, a nature walk. So make sure that to mark your calendars for this Saturday for this event. And talking about my community cafecito, I'm holding a community cafecito and resource fair this Saturday at the Fred Archer Center. This event will be free and will be held from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. It will showcase over 15 organizations and City of Tucson departments such as Suntran, Tucson Electric Power, Cox, Tucson Parks and Recreation, St. Mary's, Carondelet, and more. Representatives will be available to discuss low-income program opportunities and resources, as well as educate the community about various programs. I will also be there to sit and visit with constituents and hear their concerns and talk about their plans and my plans and for the future of the city of Tucson. The first 100 guests will receive complimentary burritos by La Cuchara de la Abuela Catering Collective. Outdoor activities include a jumping castle, perfect for kids, a bike rodeo, and a nature walk courtesy of Beyond Tucson. We hope to see you all there for a free, fun family event. Again, this is a community cafecito and resource fair, Saturday, January 12th from 10 to 1 p.m. at the Fred Archer Center, located at 1665 South La Cholla Boulevard. Call my office for further information at 791-4040. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Cunningham.
First thing is it's Senior Olympics. It's that time of year, and Tucson Parks and Recreation presents the 35th Annual Senior Olympic Festival. This festival is a celebration to promote fitness, health, and an active lifestyle among adults ages 50 and older. This year, Ward 2, Udall Park, is hosting the opening ceremonies on Friday, January 11th from 4:30 to 6:30. Events will include live performances, information, giveaways, the parade of athletes, and the lighting of the torch. The first 100 people receive a 2019 Senior Olympic souvenir pin. For more information, there's plenty of it on the Senior Olympics page and the Tucson Parks and Recreation homepage. We're really proud to be hosting this event this year, and I want to give a kudos to the Parks Department for getting that park ready. The second thing is, Rahina touched on it. Today is indeed January 8th. It's a day that our community changed considerably. Today we remember all the victims, including my friend Gabe Zimmerman, who embodied what being a Tucsonan is all about. We were classmates at the Arizona State University social work program, and he's sorely missed every day. Thank you.
Councilmember Durham.
This Saturday, January 12th, my office will partner with Constable Bennett Bernal, Lend a Hand Senior Assistance, and the Free Cycle Network for a post-holiday swap and shred from 2 to 4 p.m. at the Woods Memorial Library at 3455 North 1st. There will be free shredding services up to 3 boxes. Donations will be collected for Lend a Hand. There will also be an item swap, so bring any small items cluttering your house. And that swap is free. Anybody can walk in and collect something, so it's a great event.
Is that all you had?
Yeah.
Councilmember Fimbres.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I hope everyone had a safe and happy New Year, and hope 2019 is even a better year for all of us. On Thursday, January 17th at 1 p.m., the Tucson Rodeo Parade Committee will announce the Grand Marshal for the 94th Annual Tucson Rodeo Parade. The announcement will take place at the Tucson Rodeo Parade Museum, 4823 South 6th Avenue. For more information, you can call 294-1280. On Saturday, January 19th at 8 a.m., the Pueblo Gardens Neighborhood Association will be hosting the 29th Annual Pueblo Gardens Martin Luther King Annual Breakfast at the Homestead Boys and Girls Club, 2585 East 36th Street. The Pueblo Gardens Neighborhood Association is the only neighborhood association in the city of Tucson that holds an annual event honoring the work and legacy of Dr. King. The breakfast is free, but donations will be accepted and will go to the Pueblo Gardens Neighborhood Association's MLK Scholarship Fund that provides continued funding for education and recreational scholarships that serve neighborhood school youth. For more information, you can call James Christopher at 850-3832. And to reiterate, the annual Martin Luther King Day March in Tucson will take place at MLK Way at the Bridges on January 21st, and the U of A Tech Park, South Keno Parkway on 36th Street in Ward 5. The march will go to the Demeester Outdoor Performance Center in Reed Park, with the celebration taking place starting at 10 a.m. You're all welcome. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Manager, do you have anything to report?
No, sir, Mr. Mayor, thank you.
Let's move on to item 4.
Boards, committees, and commissions reports to mayor and council. Your Honor, there are no reports this evening.
Okay. Let's move on to item 5.
Liquor license applications report from city manager.
City Manager's communication number 3, dated January 8, is received into and made part of the record. Mr. Clerk, please read the liquor license agenda.
Your Honor, on this evening's liquor license agenda, under item 5B, we have 1 request for new license. Under item 5C, there are 4 requests for special events. Under item 5D, there are 3 requests for agent change, acquisition of control restructure. Staff has indicated that all the applicants are in compliance with city requirements with the exception of 5B1. That item will be considered separately. An appropriate motion would be to forward items C1 through 4 and D1 through 3 to the State Liquor Board with a recommendation of approval.
Get that motion, please.
So moved.
Got a motion and a second to send on items C1 through 4 and D1 through 3. Motion and second. Any discussion on those items? No, B1 we're taking separately. Okay. This is C1 through 4 and D1 through 3. We've got a motion and a second. Any other discussion on those items? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Anyone opposed? Those will go with a favorable recommendation. Item 5B1, I understand there is issue. Councilman Durham, that's in your ward, so go ahead.
Is the applicant here? Okay. We have 1 card for someone.
There's a couple more coming.
We have 3 cards for speakers who want to support the application, and 1 who wants to speak in opposition to the application. Oscar Tovar, could you speak first?
Mr. Tovar, if you could come up to the 2 mics over there and try to take the tall mic. I think it's the easiest.
Thank you. Mayor, Council, I was employed by the District Tavern Eats from November 27th to, December 31st of last year. I wasn't seeing eye to eye with Noel Chester, who is the applicant, this application. I saw a lot of things happening there that just weren't right. There was never a manager in the place at any given time other than the time that Noel was working. Things were not running correctly. The place was being run as a bar, not a restaurant. It's supposed to be a 12 license, which is what is required for it to be a restaurant or to serve alcohol. Couple of occasions, I noticed minors being in the restaurant drinking alcohol. I also noticed drugs being used in the restaurant. Food was probably the number 2 item besides liquor at the place. And this was just a short period of time that I worked at. I was there 7 days a week. I was working 65 hours a week. So as nobody could say that I did not observe what I observed. I'm a 62-year-old man, and I know what I see is what I see. There's a lot of things in the back of my mind that I'm trying to push forward, so excuse me for the lack of... The majority of it is that it just wasn't run right, wasn't what I looked at as being a restaurant, was more as being a bar. The other thing was the minors being in there, which I observed 2 different occasions, probably 3, but I couldn't tell if the third one was a minor, and the drug use. For now, I think that's all I have to say.
All right, thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
If I could talk for a few minutes. The applicant said that first of all, I want to thank TPD for their very thorough report. The applicant said that inspectors from the State Liquor Board and officers from TPD visited her place of business at unrepresentative times. So I came up with the idea to ask her for a letter from her accountant with backup data proving that she met the 40% or came close to meeting the 40% requirement that sales be from food. She provided that letter. It's been distributed to the council, the mayor and council this morning, this afternoon, and it shows 41% of sales from food. I want to remind the applicant that she will have to represent these licenses are reapplied for annually, or refiled annually, and she must represent at that time that she continues to meet the 40% sales from food requirement, and she is subject to audit. So I'm going to recommend approval, but I want the applicant to know that this must not be a TPD hotspot. She must continue to represent, to meet the 40% requirement for sales from food, and she must manage the place very well and operate it as a restaurant. So on that basis, I will recommend approval. Does the applicant or anyone else have anything to say?
And Mr. Mayor, members of the council, since these proceedings are part of the record that then goes up to the state, I would recommend that the applicant come up and at least address the issues that the council member has raised.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, will the applicant come forward? So, ma'am, I don't want you to, if you go to the higher mic, I don't want you to talk yourself out of anything, but at the same time, I think what our city attorney is saying is that we're making a record here this evening, and so you may want to help make that record on your behalf. The issue is only, there's 3 ways to deny, well, there's 2 substantial ways to deny a license. One is saturation, one is an unqualified applicant, and the third, in this case, is that you're applying for the correct license. In this case, the question arose whether the license you've applied for, which requires 40% food sales, that's the issue before us. So we don't need to hear about a lot beyond whether or not you're at that 40% food sales, how you can prove that, and how you're going to stay in compliance with that, because as Councilman Durham points out, it's a continuing obligation. So go ahead.
So you want me to let you know how, or that we're going to, no, we've already hit that.
That's the best instruction I can give you. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, council members, for hearing. Thank you for your support. Paul, I appreciate that. I have been in the possession of number 6 liquor licenses here in Butte County for approximately 15 years with no non-compliance issues ever. Those were at different locations. When I decided to engage in a restaurant and bring on a liquor license, it only seemed normal that I bring on the license and that I also use my former brand, hence the name, the District Tavern. But because I know that this is a restaurant and I have a diagram of the premises that shows that our kitchen is at least 50% of the premises. And I also wanted to show you that, we do have a menu, and the menu has many more items than just a couple sandwiches. We actually, every sandwich can be made into a pasta entree as well. All that being said, it only made sense for me to use the brand. I wanted to branch out. I wanted to learn some other things. I had an opportunity, and so I took the opportunity, and I was hoping that Ward 3 would appreciate that. We're moving forward. We're trying to generate more and more customers. I just went into partnership with Kelsey Bartholomew, who was a Ward 3 merchant for many years, the owner of Mother Hubbard's, they were also featured on the Food Network. And she and I are going into a partnership so as to reinstate and, to just try to provide a really strong restaurant, a really strong kitchen. And although my expertise is in the bar business, there's no arguing that. But Kelsey's expertise is in the kitchen and in the culinary business. And this is where I hope to gain expertise myself. And that will only happen in time. Thank you for your time.
Right. Thank you, ma'am. Okay, so we have a motion, I believe, from Councilman Durham, or do we yet?
Yes, I move that we forward this application to the State Liquor Control Board with a recommendation of approval.
Okay, got a motion and a second. Any further discussion on this matter? Councilman Cunningham?
Just had a question, Ms. Chester.
Sure.
I just wanted to, is your kitchen open till close?
Yes.
And from what I understand, you serve food after last call? You serve food?
Yes.
After last call?
Yes, absolutely.
So you're operating as a restaurant in more hours that you're operating as a bar?
Yes.
Okay, that's how I wanted.
And we're very infrequently even open until 2 o'clock. The truth of the matter is.
I just wanted to verify that.
Sure.
It's fine.
Okay, anything else? If not, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? All right, the motion passes. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
Okay, item 6.
Call to the audience.
This time, any member of the public is allowed to address the mayor and council on any issue except for items scheduled for a public hearing at this meeting. Please make sure you've read the information on the back of the speaker's card before making your presentation. Speakers are limited to 3-minute presentations. Call to the audience is scheduled to last for 30 minutes. Pursuant to the Arizona Open Meeting Law, individual council members may ask the city manager to review a matter, ask the matter to be placed on future agenda, or respond to criticism made by speakers. However, the mayor and council may not discuss or take legal action on matters raised during call to the audience. We do have a number of cards here tonight. I see more and more coming, but they may be for later matters. So I think we can probably get through certainly what I have up front. So we will start with Roger's score.
Hello, Mayor, City Council members. My name's Roger Score, and I'm here to announce that to prevent further firearm deaths, we have now classes being held at Fort Lowell and Campbell. It's 1740 East Fort Lowell, Suite 140. And what these classes do, they provide citizens with basic firearm safety classes. They introduce citizens to firearms and teach them what to do if you run across one. This month we had a lot of children there, and they learned about firearms, how they operate, so they wouldn't shoot themselves, the dangers, and what to do if they run across a firearm. And if you're a firearm owner, different safety things. If you have a chunk of dirt in your barrel, you don't pull the trigger and blow your barrel up. You don't look down the barrel. That all guns are loaded, even if you think they're unloaded. And it's really basic. It's not going to teach you to be Rambo or nothing. It's just to take away the ignorance of firearms. And the first one in February will be Wednesday, February 6th. It's always the first Wednesday of the month. And the location again is 1740 East Fort Lowell, Suite 140. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right. Where did I go wrong here? Okay, Raquel Baranow.
Hello, my name is Raquel Baranow. I live at 819 East Lee Street. This is the third time I've been here on the same subject. It's this medical marijuana facility that they are building on the corner of Park and Lee, which is about 600 feet from where I live. And I've been doing a lot of research on this, and every time I've come here, it's always something new. And I think I just came to the bottom line here, is that I found out that the part owner of this medical marijuana facility is none other than Michael J. Crawford, who used to be a Ward 3 city councilman here. And that explains why nobody, Mr. Kozalczyk, Mr. Durham, while none of them have tried to do anything about this and have been whitewashing and stonewalling this whole thing. It's a clear violation of the original zoning in 1967. Mr. Balkow bought his property in 1946 before there was any zoning on his property, and in 1949 the city annexed the area and zoned the area R3. In 1967, Mr. Balkow wanted to increase the square footage of his print shop. This is an industrial print shop. He had 22 employees there, huge warehouses, and he wanted to build an additional warehouse and employ 5 to 8 more people. And he exhausted his non-conforming use. According to the Uniform Development Code, you're only allowed to expand like 100% or something like that. And in order to proceed, he had to go through the zoning administration. And they first rejected his application to rezone his property from R2 to business property, C2 zoning, which is porn shops, billboards, medical marijuana facilities. So he took his application to the planning and zoning, and they turned him down. They said, this zoning in this area doesn't comply with the general plan, and it also is spot zoning. They specifically said it was spot zoning, and that's still what it is today. It doesn't comply with the general plan, and it doesn't comply with it's surrounded by residential zones, and so the planning and zoning finally allowed him to have the zoning changed, subject to a covenant, which should have shown up on Michael J. Crawford's zoning report if he did his due diligence. He's a lawyer, and he works for Mr. Rothschild too, or his law firm. So that explains why nobody has done anything. I would like that your zoning examiner, the city manager, can ask the zoning examiner under the Uniform Development Code, and it's all in this paper here that I've given. I haven't given one specifically to the city manager or the city attorney, but I'd like to. And I'd like to have Mr. Irano, the zoning administrator, do a thorough examination of this, because he would know if this is spot zoning or if it's a violation of the zoning laws. Thank you. God bless you.
All right, thank you. If you could hand those to the clerk and manager, thank you. All right, Barbara Crummett.
Good evening. My name is Barbara Crummett. I'm in Mr. Durham's ward. I'm here for two reasons: to speak about an issue with PAC, particularly to Mr. Kozaczek, but I also want to go back to your comment about community service. And I am concerned about the community safety issues where animals are on the street, there are bites, and PAC is slow to respond if they respond at all. I'm not the first person to report this. It has been on KVOA4 with Mr. Salzwedel, and he has been silenced by the county, where he is no longer able to even interview about these concerns. Mr. Kozaczek, in your district, and I spend a lot of time there, especially in the library, where there are many small children, there was a dog attack that actually killed the elderly gentleman's dog, and then a couple weeks later there were more attacks. I talked to the district, the neighborhood president, because they contacted me. I did not seek after them. I've been trapping in that area for years on cats and helping with the stray population. And I offered to do a community service, which was of no cost to PAC. It was to supplement what PAC fails to do. And I found that same evening, I got a knee-jerk response from Mr. Kozaczek, which you all have a copy of it, his email. And what is annoying even more than that is he shows no concern for the welfare of which I was writing about in my proposal. And I just think that you're caught up in the illusion that PAC is doing a lot of our money that's going into it, and it's not happening. So I've also prepared, overlooked the little things. I didn't have staples. Just an overview of where we have been with PAC. I've been following animal welfare for at least 15 years. I've been following the no-kill movement across the United States, and we are up a creek. Pay attention to the back where they want to go with this, and I'll make each a copy. And Mr. Kozaczek, this one's for you. Hopefully your vision isn't as bad as mine, but it's very limited.
All right, thank you. If you, Mr. Clerk, if you could get that to the appropriate folks. All right, thank you.
Can I take 5 more seconds?
5 seconds.
The other thing I didn't like about it, and I just want to remind you, when someone offers to do community service, you don't take something negative, even though you haven't verified it, and disseminate it across your ward. And that's what you did.
Okay, Robert Royce.
I've actually written something today, so please bear with me. This month marks 18 years since I first came into this room, and today is my 260th City Council presentation. It has not been a pleasant experience for me watching as this board of directors gives away the city's assets and money in the millions of dollars to a select group of millionaires and oligarchs. The past several years, the city manager government has been absolving local and out-of-state corporations from paying any property taxes for 7 years, using the city's GPLET scheme as an excuse to add to the bottom line for these developers. Perhaps the saddest effect of this lack of financial responsibility has been the way that the city's employees have been asked to pay the price, getting few, if any, raises, as their pay falls further and further behind inflation. Now this board is planning to add reclaimed water to our drinking water system without asking the citizens what they think or even notifying them that reclaimed water is on the menu. It is for these reasons and because of my great respect for the people of our city that I am announcing tonight that I am an independent candidate for the mayor of Tucson, Arizona. These are my promises: to end the giveaways, period. To do away with the GPLET tax abatements and use the employment incentives only when absolutely necessary to end Tucson Water's plans to use reclaimed wastewater as drinking water, but instead to make it available to the neighborhoods to use as irrigation for vegetation and by Pima wastewater to maintain their system. To treat the city employees with more respect than they have seen from this manager-director government in many years, including reorganizing city finances to properly compensate the many underpaid workers, to create a new respect for neighborhood integrity, to promote democracy, including a vote by the citizens on my aldermanic initiative and an initiative to create a nonpartisan electoral system, so that the citizens of our city will possess the tools to create a real and robust democracy, so that we will enjoy all of the fruits of a real democracy: peace, liberty, safety, and a new prosperity for all of our people. Thank you.
Okay. Corinne Matishich?
Hey there, my name is Corinne Matesic. I'm a resident of Tucson. I was actually born here and then left for college and came back a couple years ago. I wanted to address you guys tonight about the electric scooter rental proposal, and I'm also very much not in favor of this idea. It's really exciting to be back in Tucson to see how much growth has happened, how lively downtown is. I walk and ride my bike to work here downtown, and we also have a lot of work to do to keep making sure that our city's streets are safe for everyone. And I don't think that these electric scooters are going to do that. They're not treated really as modes of transportation, but more as toys. They're gonna get vandalized, they're gonna cause accidents, and I think that really the idea is just looking at a company who's offering something like money, but it's not really what we need as a community, which is safer streets, better transportation for everyone, and a really, truly livable community. Thank you.
And thank you, ma'am. Santiago Camacho?
Good evening. My name is Santiago Camacho. I'm a student in the aviation program at Pima College, and I'm also here to talk about the electric scooters. And I'm here to speak in opposition to them. I don't believe that this is a good solution. I believe actually it's a short-term solution to our long-term transportation problems. We already have programs that are here focused on getting around town, programs like Tugo. Also have a lot of organizations like Bicus who help people get out and to actually use bicycles. The scooters in question are produced in China. They're brought over here and they get vandalized. They're tossed into bays and cities that are, around water. I could potentially see a lot of city workers pulling them out of the Santa Cruz. On top of that, I just don't necessarily agree with the fact that they're just easily accessible transportations. I do believe that they are treated like toys. And I'm curious about how you guys got here today, because I transport myself a lot on a bicycle. On top of that, companies like Bird have had the ability to come into cities and kind of skirt laws and be a little bit vigilante about how they are generating their business. And if you guys insist that they do come to Tucson, put a leash on them. They are making a lot of money. Last year, they went into 100 cities. Set up regulations, require helmets, whatever it is to be appropriate. Do not make this a good deal for them. Make it a good deal for the city of Tucson. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. All right, that'll conclude our call to the audience this evening. Let's move on to item 7.
Consent agenda items A through D.
Report from the city manager on the consent agenda are received and made part of the record. Mr. Clerk, you're requested to read the consent agenda.
Your Honor, on this evening's consent agenda, item A is approval of minutes. Item B is transportation, approving emergency treatment for the Atterbury Wash sewer erosion hazard. Item C is the final plat S18077 Bellevue Common, lots 1 through 4. Item D is the final plat S18073 Melwood Place, lots 1 through 5. That's the extent of the consent agenda, Your Honor.
All right, ma'am, motion, please.
I move we approve the matters on the consent agenda.
Got a motion and a second. Any other discussion on this matter? Hearing none, let's go to roll call.
Mr. Durham?
Aye.
Mayor Rothschild?
Aye.
Mr. Fimbres?
Aye.
Mr. Cunningham?
Aye.
Ms. Romero?
Aye.
Mr. Kozaczek?
The items on the consent agenda are approved by a vote of 6-0. Let's move to item 8.
Public hearing C81805, amending Chapter 23B, the Unified Development Code relating to Downtown Area Infill Incentive District. Report from City Manager. Hearing ordinance number 11615.
City Manager's communication number 11, dated January 8, is received into and made part of the record. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the time and place legally advertised for a public hearing on a proposed amendment to the Unified Development Code, updating the infill incentive district provisions and allowing the IID to remain in effect with no sunset date. This public hearing is scheduled to last for no more than 1 hour. Speakers are limited to 5-minute presentations. Please come forward when I call your name and make your presentation. State your name, whether or not you live in the city, whom you are representing, and whether or not you are a paid speaker. We do have, looks like about 5 cards, so it should not be a problem getting through to everybody. Let's start with Chris Gans.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. I'm Chris Gans, live at 130 East University Boulevard in the city of Tucson. I represent Western University Neighborhood Association. I'm also a member of the IID DRC committee for the last 4 years and the current chair of that committee. One of the opportunities I have is I can walk down here every time I come to one of your meetings. That's why I'm so tired. But I get to see what's happening with downtown on a regular basis from different angles, and it's really exciting. And part of that excitement comes from the use of the IID, and part of that use of the IID comes from when Mayor and Council in 2011 extended the sunset date. They also authorized looking at the IID and revising it, and there were major revisions done at that time, which really made the IID better. And I think it's important that we keep a sunset date, whatever it's 4 or 5 years, but that it gives us time to review, to see what's happening. Things are changing fast. I mean, the face of retail is different now than it was 4 years ago. And so I think it's really important to look at what the IID's intents are and be able to go back and engage the public, because that was really important. A lot of members of the public were involved in this revision, and it was really important from all different walks of life. So I encourage you to do that. I think probably the Heights and the HBZ IID is tabled for the time being, but the Western University Review Board voted against that proposal, and the Neighborhood Association also is opposed to that proposal. But we also understand the need for new involvement, new construction and new development in our neighborhood, like multi-generational housing or office space. And so we're open and willing to work with city staff and our council members to find a different avenue to promote different kinds of development in the neighborhood. All the other ones kind of fall in if the IID sunset date is renewed, that this might be a study like demolition of historic listed properties. I think there's some room to look at that and what the consequences are of doing that and be able to use the IID. I think that's really important to look at. I know the city is working on doing mass transit passes for development, and I think it's really important as IID calls for transit-oriented development. And if we're locating in the downtown, which is going to get more and more congested, having a different way for people to move around that developers provide, at least to their tenants at a reduced rate, is really important. And get the cars out of the streets, into garages if needed, but let them ride the different transit options. And I think one of the things they've, in a letter that we sent is the idea of market rate housing is that's affordable to a wide variety of population. We need to maintain diversity in the downtown and outlying areas. And a lot of the projects that we've reviewed 9 projects. I think 3 of those are market rate residential, and those are under construction or are built. But we also need to look at how we can retain some recent college grads or people who may be wanting to move downtown or wanting to downsize and don't have the same level of income that that's required to rent some of these spaces. So I think it's really important for us to not develop out that diversity. And let's see, where am I here? We also talked about open space requirements, and I know that was just a starting comment, but I think one of the things, what I see in other cities that are engaging, and as I walk down here, I walk by the Pima County new building, and the outdoor space on the north part of that, which is really an asset to the city. And we have those parts that are really creative. They actually engage us in different ways. And I think maybe an option or a resolution of this is having developers work together to create a mutual open space that they will fund and monitor and keep and cleaned up. And so I encourage, again, back to keeping the sunset date. It's really important. I'm willing to work on it. I know a lot of people are, and will continue to do so. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Richard Mayer.
Richard Mayers. I live in the city of Tucson, and I'm not a paid speaker, and I am not representing anyone other than myself. I support a rolling sunset date because it enforces a conversation on an ongoing basis. What we need in terms of incentives and infill changes over time. We've got a lot of student housing right now. We don't have enough workforce housing. We don't have enough affordable housing. Having a conversation on a regular basis allows us to adjust the incentives in the infill incentive district to create a community that we desire. And again, it's not a static situation. I've lived in Tucson since 1959. This is not the city I grew up in. That's an example of how the world changes, and I think Mr. Mayor Rothschild understands that because he's lived here all his life, and I think Councilmember Cunningham also understands that, and so does Mr. Fimbres, Richard Fimbres, and Steve Kozacek too. So as we reflect upon the changes in our world, the lack of the dirt roads that we grew up with, the standards and the things that we did as a community have evolved and changed, and I think that the infill incentive district needs to evolve and change as the community changes. The other thing I want to stress is that the thing that came out of the revised IID that was the most important to me was the protection of historic assets. Because prior to this particular iteration of the IID, historic assets could be diminished or demolished, and the people doing the destruction of the asset or demolishing the asset could go ahead and use the IID anyway. And it created an incentive to demolition. And it's important to keep that protection in place in the current re-up. I think that the IID is very largely successful. I like what it's accomplished. There's some buildings I don't like, but there are buildings I don't like from many eras. It's brought a lot of good to the city, and there are some buildings that have been saved because of the tension that's created between underlying zoning that's difficult to use and an incentive that doesn't allow you to demolish. Anyway, that's all I have to say on this subject. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Richard. Rory Juneman.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thank you. My name is Rory Juneman, 5983 East Grant Road, Suite 290. I'm a land use attorney with Lazarus, Sylvan & Bangs. While we have represented several clients in the IID, I'm actually here not representing anybody, just speaking on our personal experience about in using the IID and over the past few years. We're asking that you approve the extension of the IID. Over the past few years, our firm has been actively involved in this process. Carrie sat on the committee that did the IID update, and over the last few months, we've been in the stakeholder meetings discussing this text amendment. What's been clear from that whole process is that the IID has been really uniquely successful for both large projects and for small businesses and for protecting historic properties. The large projects, City Park, Rendezvous, the Flynn, Union, these are all large-scale mixed-use multifamily or office projects that have used the IID's design standards that are really specific for an urban environment where we want more density. They're not they're simple things like eliminating setbacks, right-sizing your parking, but they're appropriate for this area and for the type of development we want downtown. So it's been successful on a large scale, but I think it's more importantly, or as importantly, it's been successful on a small scale, and that may not be as publicized. Small businesses like Lindy's on 4th, Revel Wine Bar, 5 Points Market, they've all taken advantage of the IID, particularly the parking relief, so they can be in historic buildings, repurpose those buildings, and really be successful businesses in the areas that we want them. And I think that that's something that's really been a key part of the IID's success as well. In addition, as Richard mentioned, there are protections that I think are strengthened by this text amendment that make sure that people don't demolish buildings, that they can't demolish or delist a historic building and use the IID. So when this in 2015 and the update, there were a lot of interest, I think, that participated and their voices were heard in that update. And the IID has done a good job of balancing those interests. And I think it's been very successful. If you just look around downtown, I think you'll see it. I did want to speak about one small change that's in this text amendment regarding the historic, the height in historic districts. Right now, a non-historic property that's on a major street, if it's in both the IID and the HPZ, is very limited on height. It can only basically go to the height of the surrounding historic properties, and in most cases that's 1 or 2 stories. In the last year and a half, you've had 2 cases before you, 2 rezoning cases where properties had to be moved out of the HPZ just so they could get a couple of extra stories of height. That was the Trinity and the Baffert projects. And at least after the Baffert, you had asked staff to go relook at this, and that's what they've done in this amendment, where they've come up with, I think, a very reasonable solution. In these cases, when there's a non-historic property, it uses the maximum height of the highest historic property in that HPZ area. So it'll allow maybe 3 to 4 stories, I think, in most cases. It's a reasonable solution. It's very limited in the properties it affects because there's really not that many where this is going to take place, but these are properties that are along major streets that I think people are going to want to develop. The best thing about it is it keeps these properties in those historic preservation zones, which I think is what everybody wants. Finally, I just want to commend staff on this process. They've done a really good job in listening to all the various interests, and I think for the most part, all of those interests agree that the IID should be extended. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Rory. Okay, so I have 2 cards here, and you're supposed to write your name, which should be your name. And in both cases, it says IID Amendment and Reauthorization as the name. Okay, so I have one clue on one of them because it does say 336 East 16th Street and has a phone number. All right, 336 East 16th Street. If you would like to come forward and tell us your name, that would be nice.
this should warm your heart. I'm the advisory chair for the Armory Park. I'm on your board. I'm one of your board chairs. Kind of scary, I forgot to say my name. Hi, I'm Martha McClements. I still live at 336 East 16th Street, and I apologize for not handling the card properly. I'm here to speak because the IID does give some protection to the historic preservation zones. And so we recommend, and I like the term the rolling, extending the sunset date of the IID, with reviews scheduling every 3 to 5 years. As for the text height amendment, the Armory Park Historic Zone Advisory Board approved the text height amendment, and in our historic zone, it's 48 feet. Our thought being we would rather deal with something 48 feet and have input into how the building is put together, like Larry's will be coming up, but we don't get to say that anymore, and have a say in it as opposed to being outside and watching a 75-foot building go up. And then we also have to deal with underlying C3 zoning issues. So the text height amendment, which the staff and volunteers have worked hard for ever since you said, please put it together, because we don't want to lose any more historic properties out of the HPZs. And I'd like to thank the committee and the staff for all the hard work they've put in. It's kind of like herding cats, especially when they don't put their name on their parts. May I introduce another person from my neighborhood, John Burr.
Who also did put their name on.
Exactly.
Excellent. You can call up Mr. Burr.
Mr. Burr, come stand here and take care. Thank you very much.
Apologies, Mayor and Council. I'm usually pretty good at dotting my I's and crossing my T's. John Burr, 424 South Fifth Avenue, Tucson. This has been kind of a roller coaster ride. In fact, the latest, I got the latest iteration of the ordinance before you this morning, which is even more of an update from the one that you got on Friday, and yet another revision of what was presented to the Planning Commission. So it's kind of hard to figure out how they all meld together. I do want to clarify that the latest iteration very clearly defines that the Rio Nuevo can use the IID and that both standards apply. It's section 5.12.2 as opposed to earlier iterations, and that's been fixed. I do have a little bit of trouble with the date of demolition that's specified, because it is the date of this ordinance rather than having any reference to the original ordinance from 2015, which I'm not sure how to legally resolve because of retroactive legality, but perhaps a reference to the intent of the earlier one may clarify it, and I hope that can be settled before it moves forward. Generally, I approve of reauthorization. I prefer to a somewhat rolling sunset date that triggers an automatic review as appropriate, but I can't tell you how long that might be. That's other people's considerations. The height text amendment is a very troubling thing because, well, the Planning Commission actually never got a full hearing on it. So they didn't understand the pros and cons, how it actually relates, which properties it relates to, or what the options would be without it, or fully understood your direction that rezonings in H are now actually on the table, feasible, and possibly in the pipeline. I think that's unfair, so I hope you remand it back, because I think you'll get a better balanced view if you pull that particular section out tonight. I can't tell you what that outcome will be, but I hope you also have a steady session with staff to clarify some of those details as well, because the actual fact is there's 5 properties in Armory Park that are buildable right now that could stay in H if this is enacted. In Barrio Viejo, there's only 2, and they are very minor, and because of the review requirements for both that HPZ and plans review, probably would not applicably apply. El Presidio is also the same. It is entirely the Tucson Museum of Art parcel and parking garage, which everybody reasonably understands would probably be a repad zoning, rather that kept historic things on it instead of trying to get an extra 10 feet. And West University, the lots that are applicable are a parking lot across from Trinity that is too small because of setback requirements for it to actually function. But reasonably, if you don't make it inclusive of all 4 HPZs and only specify one particular area, it creates an administrative nightmare and possibly a Prop 207 question of spot zoning. So that's a big ticker item. I hope a couple of these things can be resolved before you move forward with any of this tonight, especially a clarification on demolition dates for historic structures. I didn't know what to come into tonight, whether you'd get the presentation from staff first that might have clarified some of these things before the public hearing, but that's not the case, so I'm telling you where I am at the moment coming forward, and I hope you all do the right thing and reauthorize the parts that are ready to go. Thanks so much for your time.
Okay, thank you, John. Allison Solomon.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Allison Solomon. I'm representing Metropolitan Pima Alliance. Our address is 2 East Congress. And I would like to start off by thanking staff for all of the time and effort that they've put into this. It's been a long few months, I know, for them collecting input. And I think that the result is something that, as you've heard, most of the community can get behind from a larger sense. I understand that there's still details to work out, but it seems like what's been proposed is a good alternative to what we've had in place, and I say that because it takes into consideration the process. And in terms of the sunset date, we do support staff's recommendation in terms of removing the sunset date. I understand the need for review, but the feedback we heard from staff when we were participating in these stakeholder meetings the last several months is that a concrete sunset date makes it difficult to carry this out, to get feedback, to take it back to mayor and council, and it puts them in a bit of a time crunch. So giving them a little bit more flexibility to work as staff and to review these projects with your direction is beneficial. So we would like to go on ahead and support the IID. It's been working, and I think that the revisions that staff has put forward in terms of process changes will continue to improve the process. So thank you again, and we thank staff for including us in the process.
Okay, thanks, Allison. Kristen Cordanius? Cardanius? There we go. Getting closer?
Closer. Hello.
Yeah, go to the top one, yeah.
Thank you. I'm not used to speaking, so my name is Crista Romero Cardenas. I am from Tucson, Arizona, born and raised. I'm currently a graduate student at the University of Arizona in the College of Public Health. And I also want to start by thanking staff because you guys have been working a ton, and I'm very impressed with what you guys have put together. I did read the IID in its full, and there were a few things I was concerned with that I did speak at the other council meeting about. And it was in regards to the green space. So when I was reading, I was very interested to see that only 5% of the actually allotted plot area should be dedicated to open space and green space, and it wasn't clear if it's only 5% for open plaza space and if that has to be public or private, and there also is no specification in regards to if the 5% is for green space in regards to greenery, trees, tree canopy, and how that works. So I want to talk to you really quick about rapid urban development and just also use Phoenix as a case study. So Phoenix went through rapid urban development. Right now they're having problems with urban heat islands. In 2016, they actually experienced the most heat strokes they ever had, so it's a super high record. And I guess that's one reason I actually recommend to keep the sunset date, because they have seen that through the rapid urban development, they saw a lot of changes that they actually didn't expect to see. But by having a sunset date, we could actually go back and evaluate and see how those things are going. instead of moving backwards, how Phoenix is actually, they actually just passed something which is called the Phoenix, Arizona project. So it's a community forest assessment because they're actually having to go back and plant trees to combat stormwater runoff. So where there is already flooding, so for example, in downtown Tucson, we already have flooding issues. So they're having to go back and invest more money. So I thought it'd be very beneficial to add that in, or at least specify how much we need to add in regards to green space, because trees actually absorb stormwater runoff and have a lot of beneficial properties. So I want to read just something really briefly. So in regards to health benefits of urban green spaces, and this is a review of evidence, so physical and psychological benefits have been linked to green spaces through their purported effects on physical activity. Numerous health benefits of physical activity have been documented, such as the effects on cardio and cerebral vascular disease, diabetes, colorectal cancer, osteoporosis, depression, and fall-related injuries. It also improves mental functioning, mental health, and well-being, and has long-lasting psychological effects. In addition, and this is coming from Phoenix assessment, so the tree population provides valuable benefits to the communities in the Phoenix area, and especially trees are important for air pollution removal, carbon storage, carbon sequestration, and to avoid reduced stormwater runoff, and that's quite a cost. So I'd be very interested, and I would like to also offer myself to the city and staff and see how I can possibly be a resource, because I know they're already putting a lot of efforts in, but I also see how a lot of other cities, such as California and other ones, are actually had a very firm in regards to the IID. So we're trying to get people to invest in our city, but Tucson needs to love Tucson. So if we do it right, we can have them invest correctly. That way we don't have to work backwards. And also I think 5% is a very low number, but more specifically, I was very concerned because that 5% can be waived by the PDSD director. So even if the developer says, hey, you know, we want to build this, we're in building this high, and you know, there's no way to add any greenery, it's almost like I'm kind of worried about where that could put this down the road, especially where we're moving in regards to our climate in Arizona being a very hot location. So thank you for your time. I could stand for questions as well.
All right, thank you, ma'am. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Larry Kapler.
My name's Larry Kapler. I'm a longtime Tucson native here, and I appeared before this board several months ago requesting some zoning relief for the Baffert project that you may remember. I want to thank you for your support of that project and let you know that I am very much in favor of renewing the IID for all the good benefits that have been spoken about here at length. I think it's good for Tucson. It's a good way for Tucson to grow. I do think that we need it permanently, if that's possible to do. Specifically, I'm very happy to see on the agenda the text amendment for the height. I think this is long overdue, and it would have helped immensely on the Baffert if we'd had that in place at that time. I would not have had to be rezoned out of an HPZ, which I'm not necessarily in favor of all the time. I will tell you that we also own two other properties that will be affected by this, by the HPZ, that overlay in the IID, and this would help immensely to keep it in the preservation zones. So it's not necessarily a theoretical possibility that it could avoid this. It's probably much more of a reality, as all the other speakers have said, and I think that the historic neighborhoods have done a great job in realizing this and trying to find a solution for this that everyone can live with. I also think that it allows builders, developers, property owners that have these properties to treat them much more historically in sensitive ways because they've been able to get relief on the densities, which we need to have in order to make them viable. If we can't have higher densities on these projects, then we have to look for relief in other areas that are sometimes much more destructive to historic nature properties. So I want to affirm to you that this is a good thing, and thank you for getting it this far, at least in addressing it, and I do hope you vote in favor of it. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Larry. So those are all the cards we have with regard to the public hearing. I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
Got a motion and second to close the public hearing. Any discussion on that matter? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Public hearing is closed. Before I call on the staff, it seems like there is a primary issue, which is, and I think, Mr. Rankin, correct me if I'm wrong, but we need to extend the IID in some way before the end of the month, or else it would expire. Is that accurate?
The current expiration date is January 31st.
Okay, so we do have a meeting January 23rd. However, I didn't really hear, whether you sunset or not, I didn't hear, at least from the public, anybody saying, well, maybe one person saying that we should just eliminate the sunset. But my thought is that if we were to extend the sunset, however we do it, and just take that issue first, that gives us more time to go over any issue we want to. And the truth of the matter is, whether you have a sunset or you don't, just like everybody said, these issues are going to continually come up, they're going to evolve, and people are going to bring them to us. So I'm
Your Honor.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm prepared to make a motion to advance the continued, we have a sunset like in 2 weeks, correct?
Right.
So
3 weeks.
I'd love to push that a few months.
Well,
or even
5 years.
Well, the deal is I'd love to say right now, I think everybody, the sense I have in all the discussions I've had this week is that extending a sunset date to 2023, 2024, right in there, depending on which month really you're talking about, is fine. I think that everyone that I've talked to seems okay with that, and they understand that this is a constantly evolving process. I think there's some other discussions right now, specifically with some of the setback heights, and it isn't really that you need to add setback provisions, but you need to take a look at aggregate setback depending on which end of the property it's on. And then you've got some other things there's some transit-oriented stuff we want to do, but some of the mechanisms to do that aren't even within the transit system at this point, or else I'd totally do them. It sounds to me like there's also some things with the permeability of open space. One of the problems that we're having is that we're getting open space on projects, and the open space is basically sequestered to the public, so there's really no public benefit of the open space. So those are some of the things that we've been kind of wrestling with. And the IID is a great thing, and it's been very successful, and I don't want it to I don't want to close the book on it, but I don't think we can work all those things out tonight.
And I guess I'm going to go to Councilman Kozaczek, but I guess when I say extend it however long you want to extend it, just get that out of the way. If we can come back 2 weeks from now, if we can come back a month from now and pick off whatever issues we can pick off, we may be able to pick off a few tonight. But clearly there's issues we're not going to be able to resolve through tonight. So, Councilman Kozaczek?
Yeah, we'll see what we can pick off tonight. First of all, we agreed over a year ago that when we had a public hearing on a rather complex issue that we would not on that same night be taking a vote to adopt what was in front of us, but that we would not want to send the message that we didn't care what you all had to say. We wanted to take some time to let the ideas percolate and have that conversation. So if we need to extend the January 31st to the end of February or whatever it is, then let's do that. But I don't want to take the input that we've heard tonight and simply act on what was before us, unless we can make some decisions here at the table that really address some of those concerns. Extend, yes. The question is whether or not it has a sunset date. I do believe, and whoever coined the phrase, a rolling consideration, I agree with that. 9 years ago, when Richard and I started doing this, 10 years ago, the downtown core was fundamentally different than it is now. In another few years, it'll be different yet again. In the context of the conversation we had with the union and partners, new ideas were brought up, new considerations, and so I think that we do need to be flexible and nimble. and allow for ourselves the chance to bring this back over the long haul. But so the sunset date I'm going to support. Don't know where we'll land on that. 4 years, whatever it is. But I think that preserves us the option of being able to take kind of a holistic look at this instead of having to come back one at a time. Well, let's talk about open space. Let's talk about setbacks. Let's talk about height. So that's where I'd like to go on that piece. With respect to the historic, there were concerns raised, and several people have mentioned them here tonight. About the HPZ, the Planning Commission, and I think it was John Burr who mentioned the Planning Commission was considering the IID in total, and a piece of that was the HPZ consideration. And it was clear from the fact that, number one, their recommendation was a no recommendation to us. But secondly, if you watched the Planning Commission hearing, it was clear that they really weren't sure what they were dealing with. A Presidio neighborhood feels differently than Armory Park, feels differently than Woona feels. So even the neighborhoods in the HPZs are all over the map on their feelings on this. The Planning Commission didn't know, and so as a part of a motion, I'm going to suggest that we do send simply the text amendment on HPZs and the height back to the Planning Commission so they can study that, simply study that, and not in the context of this whole IID conversation. So some of the tweaks that I would like to have considered. Now I don't know when. I don't want to wait necessarily 4 years to do that, but perhaps we can push the sunset date out a month or so and have more conversation. One is sorry, Rory, but in the conversation about the union. The whole notion of student housing came up again, and we were faced at that point with a developer who came in and said, we're going to thread that needle, and instead of calling it student housing, we'll change the way we're renting these rooms or leasing these rooms, and therefore now it's not student housing, it's multifamily housing, and even though it's a major national student housing developer, it's arose by any other name. So I would like to have a conversation about any project that happens within the IID that has a residential component at least be subject to a special exception process so we can have that conversation. That's a tweak I'd like to have us address. Parking and transit, a few people have mentioned already, to have more concrete language about compelling alternate modes. Now there's a big difference between the little ice cream shop on 4th Avenue and the Union on 6th. So the little ice cream shop can't necessarily afford to buy half of their employees' annual transit passes. That may not be true of a major development. So I don't have an answer to that, but I think it's a valid conversation to have as to how do we use what's intended to incentivize development in a transit-oriented development corridor, and not simply dropkick that as something that we rely on neighbors to negotiate in the context of a community benefits agreement. So again, I don't have the answer to that, but it's a tweak that I'd like to at least have staff and stakeholders give more consideration to before we really close the book on this. Kristen brought up the issue of public open spaces. I have highlighted also that section in the IID. It's plazas and pedestrian nodes, and it does say 5% of the gross floor area of new construction is provided as plazas and courtyards. But as we've seen, that 5%, even that 5%, can wind up being internal to the construction and not accessible to the public, which basically defeats the whole intent of providing public open space. If it's not public, it's not public. And as she pointed out, wherever you went, that the PDSD director can completely waive even that 5% consideration. So another tweak that I'd like to see us be able to at least reconsider in a shorter time frame than a 4-year extension of the sunset date. Design review, there's language in what's in front of us about working with Capella, the architecture department, and hosting design review training for DRC groups. That should be nailed down as being a part of this. It was more, as I read it, it was more a throwaway line idea. And if we're going to do it, we need to do it, and we need to commit to it. But there needs to be some specificity on what that really looks like. So those are some of my concerns. I would like us to at least move tonight to extend the sunset date far enough so we can address some of the tweaks that others might have as well, but not set that 4 years out into the future. So if there's some of these that we can have in a more contemporaneously with this conversation, let's do that. But I would also like to see us pull that HPZ piece out and send that back to the Planning Commission so they can have a better conversation.
Okay, so Councilmember, before I go to you, so I think we're talking about two things. One is to have this sunset date where you have to come back and say, if we don't extend the IID, it's gone. And that, it seems, could be a longer time period.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think
we need to do that tonight. I think what we can do tonight and honor our commitment to people that says we're not going to act on complex issues the same night of a public hearing is to say, let's hear from the rest of the council members, have staff consider what they hear from us, from the public, and come back, say, by the end of March, and punt the sunset date from January 31st to whatever the last meeting in March is. I'm just picking that out of the air.
Yeah.
And then in March we can talk about whether the real sunset date is 2, 3, 4 years or whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's 6 and 1/2 times the other. And so it doesn't matter because this thing is not going to go away.
It matters from the context of there may be some things we can do now and we don't have to wait 4 years to do.
Correct, but we could also say, staff, you've heard tonight, you're going to hear from the rest of the council the ideas, you've heard from the public, we want you to come back to us in 90 days, because in 90 days, 60 days, whatever it may be, we still may not be able to resolve every issue.
But there's no leverage. There's no leverage to change it. At that point, the neighbors would lose all of their leverage because we would have extended it and locked it in for 4 years. So I think we need to be careful about that.
Okay.
I think Steve's on the right track. It's what I said at the beginning. I mean, that's why you have a public hearing. That's what public hearings are for. You listen to what everybody has to say, you figure it out, and you go back and get solutions. So let's just do that.
Councilmember Romero?
I tend to agree with Councilmember Kozaczek and Cunningham. I think we should extend it for the next 60 days probably, so that we act on this sunset that's happening. And we don't have to wait until the 60th day to pick up the conversation. We might have another study session so that we can iron out all of these issues. Because I agree with Councilmember Cunningham. I think we have to have some leverage for the neighbors, not extended 4 years tonight, but extended for the next 60 days. With input from us today, if there's a study session item because I haven't heard at all from the Planning and Development Services Director tonight. And so,
we'll get that chance.
But you see what I'm saying? I want to be able to have the community hear what he has to say, and then have an opportunity to come back, sit down, have him listen to what the community has to say, have him listen to what the mayor and council have to say, and then probably come back with a different presentation for a study session.
Okay.
I tend to agree, Mr. Mayor, that I would much prefer to have a sunset date, even when we say 4 years or 5 years, because I think that it is a good idea to be examining the effects of the infill incentive district. I would like for the maps to be dynamic, for mayor and council, anyone that's here in the future, to be able to say, you know what, we've done really good with this map, and development is happening and it's moving naturally. Maybe we want to look at a different map so that we can encourage development and investment in other areas of our city. I would also like to look at the conversation about green space. I too am concerned about it being private versus public. And to be honest with you, I also want to talk about transit-oriented development and what that means for for the developers that are receiving the infill incentive district. I don't want to be prescriptive in terms of saying you shall purchase, so many amounts of transit passes, but there should be a plan to talk to, to present to the community and the mayor and council as to how they're going to use different modes of transportation and actually make that particular development a true transit-oriented development. So there's things that, that I want to make sure that we talk about, but I don't want to let our sunset date pass tonight. I want to make sure that we extend it.
So here's my only concern in deciding how long you want to extend it for tonight. Things like what I'll call the union conundrum, which I still can't totally figure out. The transit incentive, public open space, design review, which we really have just suggested. I don't think there's any meat on that bone. Can we get the kind of staff time we need in 60 days? I don't mind at all saying extend the sunset date X amount of time. Come back to us within 60 days with as much as you've got.
I was going to suggest, it sunsets January 31st, right?
Yep.
So I was going to say maybe March 31st. So that gives it 2 months and a few weeks as well. We'd also instruct staff at that time to send the HPZ portion back to the Planning Commission, as well as have staff meet offline with the council offices and the stakeholders to iron out all the final details.
Okay, so
Mr. Mayor, members,
but push our current sunset date to April 1st, March 31st. So can I make that in a motion?
Well, let's hear from Mr. Rankin first.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Cunningham, the sunset date for the IID is actually embedded in the code. Okay, so changing the sunset date to a new date is a text amendment.
We intend to make that tonight.
I understand, Mr. Mayor. What I would suggest is that because the version of the ordinance that was presented to the Mayor and Council for consideration tonight included all the amendments that were described in the Mayor and Council communication, as well as the elimination of the sunset date as opposed to an extension to a particular date, you would give the direction tonight as to what your time frame is that you want the sunset date extended to. We'll bring back that simple ordinance on the January 23rd agenda, so it's nice and clean.
Yep.
And in the meantime, that gives you time to think about, what you've heard tonight and the issues you've raised, and the further direction then that you want to give to staff for what you want to see going forward.
Okay, perfect. Two things. Mr. Clark, given what you've heard tonight, what do you think would be a reasonable time for you to come back to Mayor and Council after you've made the rounds again, et cetera?
Honorable Mayor and Council, I think March 31st, the second meeting in March, is a good date. That gives us time to go back to our stakeholders. Some of the issues you brought up are complex design issues, so I'm going to want to reach out to Corky Poster and others that are in the design community to talk about what it takes to make those kinds of amendments.
All right. I'm going to suggest April 9th because our second meeting in March is March 19th. It's an early meeting. So if we move it to April 9th, so at least we'll have it by then.
So we'll have two meetings. We'll schedule the meeting. We'll have this as an item on the March 19th meeting, Mr. Mayor, and then we'll have another meeting for contingencies.
So I'm going to make a motion that we, this is the right language, extend the current sunset date in the existing ordinance to April 9th. Or should we do one meeting after that?
If that's the direction, then we'll bring back an ordinance on the January 23rd agenda that accomplishes that.
And that we direct staff to take the HPZ piece of this text amendment back to the Planning Commission.
I'd like to second that motion.
Okay. We got a motion. Okay, so we have a motion now, which is to extend the sunset date to April 9. That will be heard at the January 23rd meeting, probably on consent, and to remand the HPZ height issue to the Planning Commission. Okay, any discussion on that motion? Everybody good with that? Well, we'll find out in a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? All right. Okay. Is there anything else on this matter tonight? Councilmember Romero.
I wanted to bring up one of the concerns that stakeholders on the west side have regarding the map, the IID map. There's a portion in the west side. It's like a little leg. It's like a little foot that covers historic designations or the Tucson Origins Heritage Park area. And I just wanted to bring that up because that's something that the neighbors and stakeholders in the area are concerned about, because they don't want the IID as incentives to develop in historic and culturally sensitive areas. They much rather have a historic preservation of that space and wouldn't want to have the incentive to develop those pieces of land. And so I know that you've thought about this, Scott, and I'd like for you to explain a little of what you're thinking, because I want to make sure that the historic and cultural elements of that particular space are well protected.
Honorable Mayor and Council, Councilmember Romero, if we have cultural resources that are very, very sensitive, the most assured protection is to do a designation on those. I believe you've talked about that on Sentinel Peak, Tucson, the actual site, and perhaps a corridor that would lead from Sentinel Peak to Mission Gardens, Tucson, and onto the river. So if you're looking for long-term protection that would not be compromised developed, it's a designation that you're after. The IID also provides protection for historic structures. So while it does incentivize development in reducing setbacks, reducing parkings, and providing other incentives, you cannot demolish a historic building under the IID. So if you completely remove it, you're back to the underlying zoning, which is residential 2, and then you don't have historic protections. So perhaps the way council might like staff to come back and lay this out is, what are the most sensitive areas? What's the most effective method of protecting those? And then what are the pros and cons of the IID versus underlying zoning? And then give us some guidance on how we want to lay that out.
But you see, it's not historic buildings that we have up.
Sites.
It is actually cultural, archaeological sites that we have in that area. We have the foundations of the convento. We have archaeological resources for the city of Tucson that date back 4,500 years. It's not buildings, it is resources, so cultural and archaeological resources. And right now the zoning there is R2. And so we have to be able to find a way to protect the Hohokam area, to protect the Mission Garden, to protect the convento. And so instead of, and to be honest with you, I'll be very clear, the stakeholders and the neighbors in that area want to just move that map towards a little bit south of Cushing, where there is no archaeological resources. And so how do we make sure that we figure out this issue as we come back and talk about this? Do we have to move the map? Plus add historic landmark preservation in the area? How is it that we protect these resources for the future generations?
So the most sure form of protection is the historic designation. That way, any kind of land use activity that would occur on that site has to come before mayor and council. So that is the most surefire way to protect it. So
is there a possibility of making sure that we work with this concurrently?
So we can bring that back in April 9th to say this is the options you have for providing that kind of protection. You do have some questions on that side of town on how you want that area to, 1, be protected, but 2, develop. So I think there's some food for thought that needs to go into that. And so we'd be happy to bring that back in April.
Yeah, because there's areas right south of Cushing and west of the Caterpillar building that we do want to make sure that we have an incentive, the infill incentive program. But then so it's all very tight. So we want to make sure that there is opportunity for infill incentive district to be part of that, but then protect the cultural resources that we have in there. So if you can, help us put that in writing so that we work on it concurrently, just so that we don't have stakeholders and neighbors in the area concerned about incentivizing development on an archaeological and cultural site.
Councilmember Romero, we'll bring that back for your consideration and see where you end up at.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, Councilmember Durham.
You addressed that request on page 6 of the memo. On page 6 of the memo to Mayor and Council, and you say, staff have considered this request and believe that the removal of the Tucson Origins Heritage Park from the IID is not the most effective avenue to achieve the goals put forth in the letter from Friends of Tucson Birthplace due to the following reasons. And you list 5 bullet points there. Could you expand on the 3rd bullet point? The IID boundary has not changed since 2009 and would likely require recalculation of state-required criteria necessary for establishment of the IID?
I will start, and then I'll look over at Mr. Rankin. But so the state law requires that when we establish the IID, we look at blight, we look at economic incentives, we look at jobs, and where we set that boundary is based on where we find those conditions that need improving. And so if we come in and start changing the boundary, where would we move that boundary to pick up, I think, is our full area necessary for the IID. So once you start wickering the boundary, you put a lot of things in play. So what I'm suggesting, and this is part of the sunset date later on, is rather than just a sunset date, we establish metrics regarding blight, regarding population, regarding crime, regarding economics that are going on in the area, so we can measure what's happening on the ground, and if we need to move that boundary where we've been successful, then we move it to areas that need the benefit of the IID. So it shouldn't be a static boundary. Once you've achieved success and you've got the development in there that leads to everything you'd hope for, it is time to go back and look at that boundary. But it is kind of sensitive regarding the boundary. Once you start moving it, you're changing the shape of the IID and who gets incentivized. So that was a fairly complex topic. And when they went through this initial process, I believe it started in 2011. We ended up with an ordinance that wasn't working so well. We amended it to what we have today, which is highly successful. So you don't want to arbitrarily start tweaking that boundary without putting a lot of analysis into it.
Okay.
Is that the longest possible answer I can?
I have a quick question on that. While Rahina was talking, it prompted a question. If I want to build something, say, on 4th Avenue, just wherever, and I do not use the IID, I build according to the underlying zoning, and I go in and therefore demolish a historic building under the underlying zoning. The project gets delayed. I can't wind up building it, can't fund it. So I sell the property. Can somebody then come in, buy the property from me, and choose to use the IID on that parcel, on whatever they're going to build?
I don't believe there's any prohibition against that in code right now.
So the IID, in an example like that, does not effectively prevent demolition of historic buildings.
If you were to come in and intentionally demolish a structure, sell it, and then apply the IID, I believe you could currently do that under code. The changes take care of that? So the amendment was intended to deal with that scenario.
Yeah.
Okay, look at that, okay, when you come back.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, as I read it, if somebody intentionally or demolishes unintentionally a historic building, they can't use the IID. Right. Now you're talking about a subsequent owner. I think we can deal with that pretty easily. Yeah. Don't you think so, Mr. Rankin, or no?
Whether it's easily or not, I think we can deal with it.
Okay. Nothing's easy. All right. Anything else on this evening? We did vote. We voted to send the one issue back to the panel and the commission, and the other to come back no later than April 9th. All right, let's move on to item 9.
Public hearing C81804, amending Chapter 23B, the Unified Development Code relating to medical marijuana zoning. Report from City Manager. Hearing ordinance number 11612.
City Manager's communication number 10, dated January 8, is received and made part of the record. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the time and place legally advertised for a public hearing on the medical marijuana ordinance sunset date and a proposed amendment to the Unified Development Code. This public hearing is scheduled to last for no more than 1 hour. Speakers are limited to 5-minute presentations. Please come forward when I call your name and make your presentation. State your name, whether or not you live in the city, whom you are representing, and whether or not you are a paid speaker. We do have 3 cards on this matter, so we'll get those heard. Let's start with Al Wyrath.
Evening, Mr. Mayor, Council. I'd like to wish you a happy new year to all of you. I'm Al Wyruth. I live in the Rita Ranch area, so yes, I live in Tucson, and I am a spokesperson for the Rita Ranch Neighborhood Association. I sent you all a letter expressing multiple concerns that we have regarding the proposed changes to the marijuana ordinance. I hope you've had some time to consider them. I primarily will be talking about future cultivation facilities in industrial zoned areas. Our concerns are about plant size, power, water usage can be attributed to all of the cultivation facilities here in Tucson. The concerns in our letter were about the size, the odor, water issue, power, location, pesticide, chemical pollution, and facility, just to name a few of the areas. The effects on property values at this time are unknown, and it may take several years before we understand what kind of effect that has. You all decided to allow the industrial cultivation place to be put in an industrial area without any size several years ago. Homeowners before that who had bought their property knew that there was industrial land. Then you put an AEZ on top of that. And then you opened this up very quietly. And most of us had no idea that the industrial land is sitting next to our homes is now a marijuana cultivation area authorization. I was surprised during the planning department, planning commission, that a planning department staff owner told the commissioners that there would be no odor that would come from the Rita Ranch cultivation plant past the property fence. It's interesting that staff could make such a claim when during our public meetings and the meeting with Shirley Scott's office, they had no idea what kind of equipment they would need to check out for the odor or whether it was even available. There are 8 cultivation plants in the commercial zones, totaling approximately 64,000 square feet. And maybe they don't have any problems. The facility we're talking about in industrial will be built out to 440,000 square feet with an additional 33,000 outdoor building. That is 1/2 the size of the Amazon building currently being built on Cove. Or if you know our area, which I'm not sure if you do or not, if you drive out on I-10, you'll look at the Target facility. That's 1/2 of that size. So plant size in our industrial area is a concern for our homeowners, and the homeowners have no idea that they were getting into. Water consumption is another concern we have. I didn't get a response back from the owner of the property out in Rita Ranch, and I noticed it on the staff website that you can't look at the plans for this, maybe because of security. So I did some calculations of my own based on the plant being 44,000 square feet. And I calculated, and I try to do it conservatively, water usage would be for 8,500 people a day in the plant just by itself. So I'm just wondering how many more future cultivation plants you want to have out in the industrial area. Right now you have no limit on the size. You do in commercial. But how many are you going to put out on the Southwest? 2, 3? Are you going to build a place like Rancho Del Lago and Rita Ranch and Savano and put it out there and have the water usage? Especially since we live in the desert and we have a lack of water. I don't need to tell you about that. Staff is proposing also that the ordinance sunset clause be eliminated. And we oppose that removal. Large cultivation plants that have both indoor and outdoor areas are new to this community. Why not use the Rita Ranch cultivation plant as a test bed to see if problems actually do occur, having to do with odor, water, power, and loss of power and property value? It's our recommendation that you extend the current sunset clause so more research can be done, and maybe a couple other words in the ordinance. The owners will tell you that this is for jobs, but, you know, in looking at what the people are going to have to do, I don't see these as high-paying jobs, nor ones that you can make a career on. I mean, you can water plants, move plants, harvest their product, and package them. Wow. You're not going to need a college education for a lot of that. So tonight, hopefully you will have a chance to tell the staff, hey, take some time to look at this and do some more research, because this is important to us. Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. Raquel Baranow.
Hi, my name is Raquel Baranow. I live at 819 East Lee Street, and I'm representing myself. And my concern about this medical marijuana bill is it being adjacent to a residential area. And like, I know the ones on Speedway or just about every other place, there might just be one section, the back area, that is adjacent to a residential area. And I think just about all of those are fenced so that cars cannot drive into the alley behind there. But this facility on my corner, it's right in the middle of a residential area. And Tucson is the only major city in Arizona that allows a medical marijuana facility adjacent to a residential area. Phoenix has a buffer of, I think, 500 feet. But in this case, in Tucson's situation, since I've even noticed in your study guides, it says that almost all the facilities today would be in violation if we had a 500-foot buffer. But like I said, as long as the traffic isn't going into a residential area, I don't see what the problem is. But the problem is, on this facility in my neighborhood, it's all going to go out onto Lee Street where I live. And you should see Lee Street today. Your stupid city dumped a bunch of pea gravel there, and there's clouds to fill up the potholes. There's huge potholes, and there's clouds of dust going up. If we get, and you guys also, in your study guide, it says that when this stuff becomes legal, there's going to be 3 to 5 times the traffic. All your distribution facility guys said that. Look in your study guide, it says that. So, and when this is legal, we're going to have 5 times more traffic. There's 23 parking places there now, and they're going to probably end up parking on our street. You guys made a huge mistake allowing this adjacent to residential neighborhoods. And I also think you need to define what school is. You're trying to define what a church is, but the state law says that a private school means a non-public institution where instruction is imparted. And I've noticed other cities would include dance. That's instruction. And they don't allow medical marijuana facilities around a dance school. And so, you know, you guys are just going to wait for declaratory judgment about what a school is. I mean, the IRS defines a school as a place, you know, they have a definition for it, and you don't really have one. And there is a school within 500 feet of this facility, and it wasn't even disclosed on the application. So you guys aren't policing the rules we have right now, and you haven't defined them very well, and you haven't thought very much about this. I don't know how you got away with allowing this to be adjacent to residential facilities and allowing the traffic to come into residential facilities. These people that go to these places are medicated. You know, a lot of them are also taking opiates, and they're smoking pot too. You're allowed to buy 5 ounces of marijuana a month. You know, I smoke weed recreationally. I bought it up in Oregon. But 1/8 of an ounce lasts me 3 months. What is a guy going to do with 5 ounces of weed a month? I don't believe a person could physically smoke that and be able to drive at all. So you guys, you really need to come back and take a look at this. You know, in Trinidad, Colorado, where I bought some weed once, they have all the pot shops on one street. It's like the Wild West there. You know, you walk down the street and each one is a different pot shop. And so you really got to do your research, and survival of the fittest, it's all going to come down. They're not going to have that many, but, you know, if you really need pot, you can drive away and get it. But not in my neighborhood, you know, and I just can't believe you're allowing this to happen in my neighborhood. And the only reason I think it is because it's co-owned by Michael J. Crawford. And you guys know who he is, right, Mr. Rothschild? Because he's working for your business. And he used to be in the Ward 3. He was a city councilman. So please mind your P's and Q's and get this right so that we don't have serious problems. You know, I almost got hit by a car coming out of the car wash they used to have there. The car wash has an occupancy code of 18 people, but this pot shop is designed for 104.2 people. And when it's legal, I'm sure there's going to be that many people in there. And they're all going to be driving, pulling out of the driveway onto our residential neighborhood. People on bicycles going to school could easily get hit. I got hit. I jogged by there every morning. And I ran into Mr. Kozalchuk once at the university running around. And I tell you that I almost got hit by a car coming out of that. And there's a wall there right next to the house. These potheads are going to come out of there. They're not going to look left or right. They're just going to zoom right out and kill somebody. God bless you. Peace and love.
David Schmutz.
Mayor and council members, my name is David Schmutz. I live in Rita Ranch in Tucson. I'm not paid. I'm representing myself. I have a written statement I would like to submit. I'm going to skip most of the first paragraph because it's statistics about marijuana use under the medical marijuana program. Just a few highlights from January through November of last year. In Arizona, there were sold 109,000 pounds of pot. That's 54.5 tons. That's how much was used. And the numbers keep going up every year. 87.5% of the people that qualified for medical marijuana cards listed chronic pain as their condition. So I'm going to dispense with my personal views about the fraud of medical marijuana, except to say it is a term made up and used dishonestly by the proponents of legalized pot in an industry ready to capitalize on the addictive nature of its product, the same as the alcohol, tobacco, and porn industries. Our state and local governments are also cashing in through taxes and are totally complicit. What we have here is not medical marijuana, but legalized pot, a direct breach of the laws of the United States. So to my point tonight relative to zoning, the City of Tucson's zoning ordinances for marijuana cultivation locations, what I will refer to as pot farms, has allowed a pot farm to be built next door to the Rita Ranch neighborhood, of which I've been a resident for over 22 years. The pot farm in question is about a quarter mile in a straight line from my backyard, with only an abandoned church building and Rita Road between it and our home. The permits were granted and construction began before the community was aware what was coming. This is completely unacceptable. You have allowed an affront to our community, and I want it removed. If you really need to have pot farms in Tucson, find a place for them away from residential neighborhoods. I requested from the planning department information on available zones for such sites that are at least a mile away from residential neighborhoods, and was told that there are 3,700 acres of such land, although some of that is part of the Air Force Base and the airport. I would like to submit the map I received that shows these areas for the record. Unfortunately, mine is not in color. In my personal opinion, pot farms do not belong in the city at all, but rather should be in agricultural zones in the county like other farms. Thank you for your attention.
And thank you, sir.
I'd like to submit these papers.
Yeah, sure. It's the clerk. Okay, those are all the speakers we have on this matter tonight. Can I have a motion to close the public hearing? Can I have a motion, make it a second, to close the public hearing? All in favor say aye. Anyone opposed? Public hearing's closed. Mr. Clark, could you come up and tell us, I mean, I've heard the three speakers, but can you clarify what it is we're voting on here tonight?
So tonight you're amending the medical marijuana ordinance to allow for 25% floor space within the lobby of a medical marijuana dispensary.
Okay.
And my other two items Dan Bursick wrote this ordinance. I'm going to bring the architect up here and let him talk it.
Honorable Mayor and Council, so the other items related to this are odor mitigation. So currently, odor mitigation is not a part of the ordinance for medical marijuana. It is something we've been using a zoning condition for. We are codifying that and adding some clarification for that. We are addressing a little clarification related to churches and religious uses, just to make sure that it's more clear. And then basically looking at parks and making sure that we have an updated parks list.
And the internal architecture with regard to how much of it's the retail space versus?
So essentially right now it's 25% of gross floor area. This came up in our stakeholder meetings and some of the public meetings, and it seems that sales floor area might be a better use of that. A lot of times there's storage, there are offices, and some of these facilities there's places where you have infusion kitchens and things of that sort.
Okay. All right. Anybody, Councilmember Fimbres?
Thank you. How would the new proposed ordinance deal with odor complaints?
Excuse me, Councilmember.
How would the new proposed ordinance deal with the odor complaints? The odor?
Odor complaints.
So the Councilmember Fimbres, Mayor and Council, ultimately it adds in a regulation that requires either an HVAC facility to clean the air or using best practice methods through our zoning administrator. And then they would be required to submit an odor mitigation plan when they bring in their plans for zoning review.
Okay, and then the other one I have is, can you remind us the issue with religious institutions and why the clarifying language was needed and added?
Honorable Mayor and Council, Councilmember Fimbres, yes. So basically, this came out of our public meetings and our stakeholder meetings as well. It's just that by only pulling out church, they were worried that it wasn't inclusive enough of different types of other religious organizations. So we added in temples, synagogues, mosques, things of that sort to make sure that we could make that interpretation.
Okay. Anybody else have anything on this?
I do.
Councilmember Kozaczyk.
I'm just going to go through the pieces of this real quickly. To 25% of the sales floor area versus the gross square footage seems reasonable. We're not expanding the footprint of the building. We're simply redefining how we carve up the building.
No. Councilmember Kozaczyk, that is correct.
Yeah, the odor mitigation you just explained. The church seems totally reasonable. How are we now, though, going to define a park? We're, for instance, about to install a parklet at Campbell and Grant. I don't want to be overly restrictive in how we're defining that, but we need to have some sort of is it a pocket park in our neighborhood? Is it Himmel Park? How are we doing that?
Councilmember Kozaczyk, Honorable Mayor and Council. So it's basically how we've been defining it so far for our list. It is any publicly owned park and publicly maintained park, except for linear parks and greenways, and that's how we've been doing this throughout.
So if it falls under the auspices of Tucson Parks and Recreation as a city park or parklet, then it'll be included in the setback provision.
And that is correct, Councilmember Kozaczyk.
Okay. Anybody else have anything else on this? All right.
So it's just address the concerns that we've heard about no size limitation. Where would be the appropriate venue and what would be the appropriate forum to address those concerns in industrial areas? Because that's not what we're voting on tonight.
Councilmember Kosacik, that is correct. So these are a part of the zoning ordinance, and they could be changed. I will say that, through our research and our meetings, we've really only had one zoning violation related to medical marijuana facilities since 2010. That was in an enclosed space. Someone reported a possible illegal grow site. They went out, inspected it, talked to the owner, remedied the situation, and we haven't had any issues. And that was in 2015. As of now, we don't necessarily believe that the size limitation is an issue. There are other municipalities, Ahwatukee, several other in northern Arizona that also have an unlimited size limitation for industrial zones. Industrial zones are our most intense zones. They seem to be the appropriate place for them. So that's the reason why we ended up where we are with our current regulation.
Are the setback requirements between industrial zones and where they put up against residential for these?
There is, Councilmember Kosacik, there aren't any residential setback zones for these. This is in line with many other cities in the state as well. So places like Flagstaff, Marana, Mesa, Oro Valley, Pima County, Sahuarita, Tempe all have no residential setbacks for their facilities. You have to be really careful with residential setbacks because, especially in Tucson, a lot of commercial zones have residential right behind them. So if you start putting in setbacks, you severely limit where some of these businesses and organizations can go.
It would be the topic for a different conversation at a different time in a different venue.
Okay, anybody else have anything on this? If not, do we have a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I move to pass and adopt ordinance 11612.
Get a second on that?
Second.
We got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, let's go to roll call.
I'll read the ordinance first, Your Honor. Ordinance number 11612 relating to planning and zoning, amending the Tucson Code, Chapter 23B, Unified Development Code, Section 4.9.9, and setting an effective date. Mr. Fimbers?
Aye.
Mr. Durham?
Aye.
Mr. Cunningham?
Aye.
Mayor Rothschild?
Aye.
Mr. Kozaczek? Aye. Ms. Romero?
Aye.
Ordinance 11612 passes by a vote of 6-0. Let's go on to item 10.
Zoning C91812 Bonanza 550 LLC, Bonanza Avenue, SR to RX2, City Manager's Report, Report from City Manager, Report from Zoning Examiner.
City Manager's Communication number 7, dated January 8, is received and made part of the record. This is a request to rezone approximately 10.4 acres from SR to RX2 zoning. The rezoning site is located on the southeast corner of Bonanza Avenue and Colette Street. Staff recommends authorization of RX2 zoning subject to certain conditions, including limiting the homes to one story as proposed by the applicant, with a maximum height of 22 feet as shown on the revised preliminary development plan dated October 11, 2018. The zoning examiner has recommended approval of RX2 zoning subject to conditions, including a condition limiting the homes to a maximum height of 18 feet to make them compatible with the surrounding homes. Is the applicant or a representative present on this property? Could you come forward, sir? State your name and your relationship to the property.
Good evening, Mayor and members of council. My name is Paul Yetzi with Rick Engineering, 3945 East Fort Lowell Road, Suite 111. I'm a consultant for the applicant on this for this rezoning case.
Is your client agreeable to the proposed requirements as set forth by the zoning examiner?
We would prefer to have the flexibility to go to a maximum of 22 feet.
Okay.
When we originally made the application, this was a project that had both single and two-story homes. And so we had proposed to limit, I think, 5 of the lots to single-story only and 18 feet. Now we've got 23 homes. It just makes sense to have a little more opportunity for architectural diversity to go to 22-foot height. So we're in agreement with the staff recommendation.
Okay. You're in agreement with all of the proposed requirements, but you would like us to consider going higher than 18 feet?
Yes.
Okay. Councilmember Cunningham?
Your Honor, there's several things at play here. First of all, the developer came in originally with a substantially higher number of homes. At this point, we're down to one home per almost 2.25 acres, which is pretty big. Also, the minimum lot size is going to be 12,000 square feet, which is almost which is more than 1/4 acre, which is larger than most of the lots of new construction. Finally, the 22 feet, from what I understand in my discussions with Mr. Masters, was that there's some architectural pieces for sustainable homes and energy efficient homes, and the vaulted ceilings, and these are going to be pretty luxury homes, and so to have that opportunity, you need that 4 feet. So I think that's a pretty reasonable request. And speaking with the neighbors, they're really happy that there's going to be no 2-story homes in this development. So I think that this is the meetings of the minds have come together, and we have a pretty good proposal.
So your motion would be to accept the proposal given to us by the zoning examiner, but amend it to the 22 feet.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Here's that motion. We have a second? Got a motion and a second. Any other discussion on this matter?
Is the 22 feet per the UDC, so it will also allow a 4-foot parapet, or is that 22 feet all in?
It's 22 feet as measured by the code.
Say
As
that again?
specified by the UDC.
So it's 26 feet. Is that what you understand?
I was understanding 22 feet all in.
UDC allows a 4-foot parapet?
It does allow parapet, yes, but being a single-story home, it's very unlikely that the height of the deck would be 22 feet in a single-story home.
So,
Mr. Cunningham.
So we're really looking at sloped roofs rather than flat roofs.
So you're looking at 22 feet all in.
22 feet as measured by the code, which it measures different. It's measured in different locations.
Are you going to build any parapets on here?
We haven't identified the specific builder, and so we don't have that's why we're looking for the flexibility. We don't know what a builder is actually going to want to put on this site. I would say that under the FLD, which is what we're proposing to use, the code allows us to go to 25 feet. We've voluntarily lowered that to 22 feet. And I would also say that the neighbors can build to 30 feet on their lots by code. So,
Cunningham?
Your Honor, let's give them the 22. I think this is not a very dense, it's a very modest in density. You've got, I want to say it's almost one home per 2.25 acres. They've got some open space in there. They've got setbacks. They've got 12,000 square foot lots. I think this is a good project. I'm going to move that we. I'm going to move the project forward with the 22 feet.
Yeah, I mean, as your staff recommends authorization to RX2 zoning subject to certain conditions, including limiting the homes to 1 story as proposed by applicant with a maximum height of 22 feet, is shown on the revised preliminary development plan dated October 11, 2018. That's what you're moving.
That's what I'm moving. Staff recommendation.
All right. Got the second? All right. We got a motion. We got a second. Any further conversation on this matter? Hearing none. Let's see what we got here. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Sort of no roll call. Anyone opposed? All right. Oh, okay. We got 5-1. All right. Let's move on to item 11. City Manager's Communication number 13, dated January 8th, is received and made part of the record. Mr. Clerk requests to read Resolution 22979 by number and title only.
Resolution number 22979 relating to delegation of the city's authority to declare official intent to reimburse projects to be financed or refinanced with the proceeds of the city's bonds, certificates of participation, and other financing obligations to certain officers, and to declare the city's official intent to reimburse itself for certain public parks projects with the proceeds of general obligation bonds.
What's the council's pleasure?
A couple of questions before I make the motion. You're asking, just to clarify, you're asking us to commit general fund money in both fiscal year 19 now and fiscal year 20 with the agreement that the general fund will be made whole with a sale of GO bonds when that begins per Prop 407.
That's correct, Councilmember.
With the goal of expediting project delivery.
So the bonds will be sold in the spring. So the way it would look by the end of fiscal year 20, the general fund would have been fully repaid.
For fiscal 19.
By the end of fiscal year 20.
Okay, so when we see the numbers 976,000 in 19 and 11.5 million in 20, when will the first bonds be sold?
The spring of 2020.
Okay, so there will be no real impact on the general fund.
There is
in that
no
fiscal year.
impact as far as expenditures. It's just a cash loan. So
But
they're
will it be
borrowing
repaid
cash from
within
the general
same-
fund, and then it
within
will
the
be
same
paid.
fiscal year. Okay. All right. I wanted to make sure. All right. So, and the material says with the intent to reimburse. Is that legalese that really commits us to doing so, or is that, gee, if we think about it at the time, we'll do it?
Yeah, it really is just the legal language to accomplish what's just been described.
Okay. With that, I'd move the motion. We'll move the item.
Okay, we got a motion and a second. Any further discussion on that matter? Hearing none. That one looks like roll call.
Mr. Kozaczek?
Aye.
Ms. Romero?
Aye.
Mr. Fimbres? Aye. Mayor Rothschild?
Aye.
Mr. Durham?
Aye.
Mr. Cunningham?
Aye. Resolution 22979 passes by a vote of 6-0. Item 12.
City Magistrates, appointment of special city magistrates and fixing compensation, report from city manager, ordinance number 11613 and ordinance number 11614.
City Manager's communication number 8, dated January 8th, is received and to be made part of the record. Mr. Clerk, you're requested to read ordinance 11613 by number and title only.
Ordinance number 11613 relating to city magistrates pursuant to Tucson Code Section 8-2.2, appointing Kenneth B. Bowman as special city magistrate to serve upon call by the presiding magistrate of the Tucson City Court, fixing compensation and declaring an emergency.
What's the council's pleasure?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move that we pass and adopt ordinance 11613, naming Kenneth Bowman a special magistrate.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any discussion on this matter? Hearing none, let's go to roll call.
Ms. Romero?
Aye.
Mr. Cunningham? Aye. Mr. Durham?
Aye.
Mr. Fimbres? Aye. Mr. Kozaczek?
Yes.
Mayor Rothschild?
Aye. Ordinance 11613 passes by a vote of 6-0.
Yeah.
Mr. Clerk, you're requested to read ordinance 11614 by number and title only.
Ordinance number 11614 relating to city magistrates pursuant to Tucson Code Section 8-2.2, appointing Frederick S. Klein as special city magistrate to serve upon call by the presiding magistrate of the City of Tucson City Court, fixing compensation and declaring an emergency.
What's the council's pleasure?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move that we pass and adopt ordinance 11614, naming Frederick S. Klein as special city magistrate.
We got a motion and a second. Any discussion on this matter? Hearing none, let's go to roll call.
Mayor Rothschild?
Aye.
Mr. Fimbres?
Aye.
Mr. Durham?
Aye.
Ms. Romero?
Aye.
Mr. Cunningham?
Congratulations, Judge. Aye.
Mr. Kozaczek?
All right. Ordinance 11614 passes by a vote of 6-0. Judge Riojas, thank you for staying with us through all this, and please convey to the magistrates their reappointment. Thank you. All right, let's go to item 13.
Adjournment.
Council stand adjourned. Next regularly scheduled meeting will be on Wednesday, January 23rd, 2019, 5:30 p.m. Mayor and Council Chambers.